So, first question, between the healthcare industry, schools, and homes, where do you think vaping is doing the most damage right now?
This is an epidemic. It truly is. As someone that has two high school or teenage daughters, the things that they've told me about half of their people that they know in their class are vaping. We've seen statistics that show that. So this is a huge crisis because you're having young folks, the bodies are still developing, basically becoming addicted to nicotine, and that's going to be a lifelong, terrible habit, terrible addiction, and that's going to have all sorts of repercussions on healthcare costs and everything else associated with it.
Okay, so what is it about vaping that the general public may not understand?
I think folks don't appreciate how easy it is to vape. I've heard stories where there are literally teenagers in high school that have vape devices that look like USB sticks, and they're vaping, they're almost playing a game out of it. And so it's much more available than people think. And the second part about it, we've seen from the devices we've seized that now people are using THC and other drugs in their vaping devices. So there's this compounding effect. And I guess the last thing I would say that people don't always appreciate is the amount of nicotine. So there's as much nicotine in one of those vaping cartridges as there is in a whole pack of cigarettes. I mean, it truly is toxic. Like if you were to drink it, you would literally die.
Okay, so what kind of year has it been for schools in their battle to curb vaping among students and campuses?
We are seeing a crisis. We know because we are getting more and more calls from schools or school resource officers asking us to help. And so in this past year, our office has gone out and we try to do undercover buys, and I know Joe's been involved in those, and you'll see that the failure rate is about 14%. So, if you're doing, 1,000 undercover buys, that means about 140 of those locations are selling nicotine or tobacco products to people that are underage. So that's a serious problem. And we also know now that there's flavored, devices and with these cartridges. And so that's also creating all sorts of opportunities for kids to become addicted. And so I think that what I've seen is as people become more aware of it, they realize how important this is. It's a public health crisis. We need to do something about it. And so you're starting to see more and more engagement. This last year, our office did more than 200 presentations to high schools and other groups about vaping. And as a result of that, we're seeing now more complaints. Parents, teachers, educators, schools resource officers are contacting us saying, hey, could you please do something? We know that this is where the person bought it from, or can you help us with these presentations?
Okay, so compared to cigarettes, what unique challenges come with vaping epidemic on school campuses?
They're so easy to conceal and camouflage. You can get a device that literally looks like a USB stick, something that someone can stick in their purse or their pocket that's not readily visible. A lot of times you don't have that same smell and that kind of toxic air. In the old days, when someone was smoking in the restroom, everyone knew it. The smoke alarm would go off and everything else. And so there's not as many of those bells and whistles. And that's why you hear these terrible anecdotes from teenagers where people literally are almost making a game out of it, where they're smoking in class while the teachers are, vaping in class. And that's something you would never be able to do before, because if you had to light it and do that, you don't need the same kind of process you do with a traditional cigarette or traditional tobacco product.
So are you and your investigators seeing any signs that things are getting better, or is prevalence of vaping getting worse?
I think it's getting worse, and this is something that since I've been Attorney General, we've gone after retailers that sell tobacco products to people that are underage. So this is something we've been engaged in, and I just know this last year the failure rate was about 14%, which is a little higher than usual. And what we're seeing is that I think with the availability of online sales or even these flavored cartridges that are available, you're starting to see more and more options. And so the recent statistics say that about 51% of high school kids have tried vaping. And so I worry that people don't see the harm with this. They don't think it's a big deal. So then they start using other illegal drugs inside of these devices, and it's become so easy and so prevalent. That's my concern. And I'll tell you, as someone that has two teenage daughters, I worry about what's going to happen, the peer pressure they're under when you have so many kids in that environment doing vaping.
Okay, so our ride-alongs found some repeat offenders who don't seem to be learning their lesson. How concerning is that to store owners continue flaunting the law?
I think that's a huge problem. We literally were talking about this just a few weeks ago that we need to increase the penalties. So, it's one thing if sometimes you'll hear, when you cite someone the first time, they'll say they didn't know or they thought the person was over 18, whatever their excuses are. But when you see multiple offenders, it's the same exact penalty. So the way the law is written right now, it doesn't matter whether you're a first-time offender or this is your 10th time being busted. It's the same fine. It's the same fine structure. So what I would like to see is what other states have done, where if the penalties get progressively worse. So if you're a multiple offender, you will increase the penalties. And at some point, I think we need to make a determination as a society, where do we place this priority? So if you're selling products to people that are underage illegally, at what point do you say, you know what, this is no longer a fine, but we're going to actually threaten you with jail time as well? Because right now, it's just a fine.
Okay, so vaping seems especially insidious because of the high concentration of nicotine. What is all that nicotine doing to our younger people who are getting hooked as teenagers?
One of the biggest problems with vaping is that young people's bodies are still developing physically, mentally. And so when you become addicted to something, when you pick up a nasty habit that causes a lifelong addiction, that's going to affect you. That's going to affect you down the road when there's all these secondary health issues about your blood pressure and your heart and even your brain development. So there's obviously health risks associated with it. And I think when you're a teenager, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed and you don't fully appreciate all those risks associated with it. So if you're in an environment where there's a bunch of other kids doing it and nothing seems to be happening, it's hard to tell people. It's hard to tell your sons or your daughters or nieces and nephews to not do it, that there's all these consequences. And so that's why us as a society, we need to send a strong message how dangerous this really is. And that's why we need to punish those that are selling or providing vaping products to people that are underage, and also educating folks, letting them know that this isn't something harmless, that this is a serious health risk. It's nicotine, and when you become addicted to that, especially the strong content that's in a vaping cartridge, more than a traditional pack of cigarettes, that's an issue that's going to affect you the rest of your life.
Okay, so how important is it to cut off access to stores? Some could argue teenagers who want to vape will always find ways to get it no matter what.
We got to make sure that we do not have a defeatist attitude. If your attitude is, oh, well, someone may do it or someone may slip through the cracks, if your attitude is that someone may do it or something may slip through the cracks, then you would never enforce the law. And that's not the way we live our society. I think it's important that we stigmatize and we demonize underage tobacco use. And at the same time, we have that law enforcement element that goes after those that are providing, nicotine or vaping products, tobacco products, to the people that are underage. I mean, I can only control what I can control, and we're aggressively going after this, whether it's educating kids and parents about the dangers of it, going after the retailers. But this is something, quite frankly, I think is going to take a community effort, because this really is a statewide problem. I know when I've traveled to other communities, when I've been to places like Thatcher or up in Prescott, people there will tell you this is affecting their communities. This really is. We are on the tip of a statewide, we were in the midst of a statewide epidemic, and we need to do something about it.
So you have 2 investigators dedicated to enforcing nicotine sales laws in stores for the entire state. Is that enough given the gravity of this problem, and are you willing to ask the legislator for more investigators?
Yeah, I would love to have more resources, and I understand that, oftentimes, the legislature is trying to balance out budget issues with, providing us funding that we need. But I think my track record speaks for itself. A few years ago, the legislature provided us money for internet crimes against children. You've seen us increase the number of prosecutions we've done successfully on people that are exploiting minors in human trafficking cases. So if I can get the resources from the legislature, we can go out there and be much more aggressive in targeting people that are providing tobacco and vaping products to people that are underage. At the same time, I do think the legislature needs to increase the penalties for those that are multiple offenders.
Okay, and then what else is your office doing to fight the underage vaping epidemic? I think you touched on that.
There's a multi-pronged approach, and so we have been very active in presenting and going out with our community group, doing presentations on the danger of vaping. We have a whole program. If you're a school, a civic group, and you want to see or want us to do a presentation on the dangers of vaping, please contact our office. Go to our website. We can provide you that information, because it's important that people have knowledge. And I know a lot of times, teenagers won't make good decisions, because their brains are still developing. But if we can get that information to parents, to teachers, school resource officers, so they know what to look out for, so they can know how dangerous this is. I know a lot of parents, I have 2 teenage daughters, you talk to them, and they don't even appreciate how widespread this is now in our schools, where you got about half the kids in high school that have tried vaping. So I mean, this is a major issue. We need to do everything we can to educate folks about the dangers of it, but we also need law enforcement going out there and enforcing the law and cracking down on businesses that are selling to people underage.
And then finally, is there anything else you want to say about what you've observed about this problem in our state?
From traveling this state, especially for the past few months, this is obviously a very major issue. There are so many parents that come up to me and say we need to do something about this. And I will tell you, as somewhat a parent of 2 teenage daughters, I've heard the stories firsthand about the number of kids that are doing this. We know it's a major problem. Statistics and studies have shown that about half the kids have tried vaping. And so if we don't do something about this now and we're not aggressive about it, we're going to have a whole generation that's going to be addicted to nicotine and tobacco products. So the time to act is now.
Perfect. So let me just get a few cutaways. Pretend that I'm still here. More or less you want have
Katie?
Sit here.
Well, and the other thing I think is would be nice
Yeah,
is
go
to
ahead.
talk about, and you can get cutaways, is the
Former
parents
reporter,
can-
habits die hard, you know?
what can parents do at home? They hear their kids talking about, oh, so-and-so bought their jewel from the store. What can they do about it?
Well, I think parents should contact us if they think their kids are vaping, or they should contact their school, and whether it's school resource officers, teachers, parents, they can contact us. We do presentations. Additionally, if we have information on a store or an outlet that's selling tobacco products to people underage or vaping devices to people underage, we will go in there and try to do undercover buys. So, I mean, one of the messages I'd like to get out is that if you're selling tobacco or vaping products to people that are underage, we're coming after you.